This is Volubilis, or what's left of it. And what's here is impressive, but there would be much more of it if not for a great earthquake during the 1800s that greatly damaged it, and if many of its stones hadn't been harvested to build the city of Meknes years ago. This was, or I should say is, a place linked to some intriguing historical figures, starting with the Berber king Juba II, placed on the throne of the Roman client state of Mauritania here in 25 BC by none other than Augustus Caesar. Juba was educated in Rome and was married to Cleopatra Selene II, the daughter of Cleopatra and Mark Antony.
From here, he ruled over a thriving kingdom on the southwestern edge of the Roman Empire, which produced grains, olives, and not least of all, wild animals for Rome's gladiator enterprises.
But Volubilis became even better known 5 centuries after the Romans lost their grip on this region, when one of Morocco's greatest early rulers, Idris I, settled here and raised the city to new heights in the late 700s CE. Idris I was a remarkable figure, and he certainly had the bloodlines well suited for an early Moroccan king. He was the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad.
When Idris I died, he was buried on a hill a few kilometers from here. The 8th century settlement that grew up around that burial site is today's Moulay Idriss. Although only 5 kilometers from the ruins, the town remains blessedly undefiled by tourism. That's because most visitors to Volubilis arrive by tour bus from Meknes and seldom go there.
For what's been excavated and partially restored here, we have the French mainly to thank. French archaeologists became active here in the last half of the 1800s, and their work accelerated after France colonized Morocco in 1912. And while it may seem unlikely, the French were allowed to continue their work even after Morocco gained its independence in 1956, excavating and restoring some of the most important structures here.
Among them, this victory arch, erected in 217 CE to honor Emperor Marcus Aurelius, better known by his nickname, Caracalla. As a reward for the city's loyalty against Rome's enemies in the region, Caracalla granted Roman citizenship to its residents and suspended taxes for 10 years. When he died, they built the arch in his honor.
You wouldn't guess it, but there are actually quite a few people on the site today. And yet, mostly I'm walking around among ruins that are desolate and deserted. I can barely hear the muffle of voices in the distance. And that's simply because of the sheer size of Volubilis. This is a World Heritage Site, and yet there is little restriction on the freedom of movement within these ruins, which to my taste makes it very special, because you're not confronted with wide swaths of areas that are fenced off. Whether that's the best thing or not, to be able to step on all these ancient stones and climb over and around these walls lies in the eyes of the beholder, I guess. But it gives the entire place a kind of raw feeling, as if you're discovering something anew. Walking in what was a very wide street, the main avenue through this ancient city, from gate to gate, Most of it is hard-packed gravel now, but if you look down the center of the street, you can see some of the original stones that have been left in place. The water for this city was provided through aqueducts, only a few pieces of which remain today, and then secondary canals ran throughout the city to bring the water to the houses and bathhouses. Here's a classic example of it running beneath the foundation of this ancient home. You see the channel, it's dry at the moment. It works its way from one end to the other. An indication of just how efficient the place was, given the era, going back to before the time of Christ. This was a civil basilica built around 200 CE, housing the court of law and the magistrates, and looking out on the city's forum, which is, of course, what the ancient Romans called their marketplace, and the Greeks called agoras. Just across the way from the basilica, you can see behind me, is a temple that was built in 218 CE by the successor of Caracalla, the year after his death. It is a temple dedicated to the then much venerated trinity of gods worshipped in the empire: Juno, Jupiter, and Minerva. In the middle of what was the interior of this great structure, now strewn with the capitals of once great pillars that held this building up, and now, of course, abandoned, except for perhaps one family of storks that's made its nest in one of the pillars behind me. Whenever I see ancient antiquity sites such as this, their histories just are a bit difficult to understand in part, particularly in this case, the fact that as great as this city once was under the Romans and the Berbers before it, by the 1100s CE, it was all but abandoned, and many of the residents here had moved away, most of them to the nearby settlement that is today Moulay Idriss. It's in the distance. I can swing around and perhaps you can see it. It's difficult to see Volubilis from Moulay Idriss. You may be looking at it, but it sort of dissolves into this great valley. But when you're here, down in the valley, looking at the mountains, Moulay Idriss stands out like a jewel. If you're wondering what became of some of the impressive statues and other artifacts found here, well, many of them, at least the ones that weren't looted, wound up in Morocco's capital at the Rabat Archaeological Museum. As recently as 1918, archaeologists unearthed the magnificent bronze bust of the famed Roman orator and senator Cato the Younger, which you can see if you visit that museum. I'm looking out across this beautiful, expansive valley, beautiful hills with olive trees streaming down its sides and fertile fields, a place that drew empires of the past, and I suppose understandably makes anyone who visits this place, and I include Moulay Idriss, not really want to leave so quickly.